Okay, in less than 2 minutes, if I can do this, why I love the Latin Mass. Well, I would start with number one is the dignity that is given to the Mass by the priests and the altar servers, of how they serve the Mass and how they offer the Mass. It's very beautiful. Everything's like in sync. It kind of looks like a military parade in a sense. Each gesture has meaning and beauty behind it when you look into it, why they do what they do. But it's just very dignified. Um, the reverence of the Latin Mass it far exceeds what you see in a Novus Ordo English Mass. The reverence of how the Mass is celebrated by the priest, his demeanor, even the reverence that is shown by the people that go there. Like, for instance, like when you come to a Latin Mass, you don't see people having gab sessions before Mass starts, or even when the Mass ends. You don't see people just having a gab session in church. You see people, when you first come there before Mass starts, people are praying. When the Mass ends, you see a lot of people staying behind and pray, and they're quiet. There's a silence about it. It's beautiful. So they show much respect and reverence. Um, the reverence and how the Eucharist is given out and how you receive it. We go up to the altar rail and we kneel, and the priest himself, who had his hands, consecrated to touch the Eucharist to begin with by his bishop, he alone gives communion, and he places it on your tongue, and he comes down to each person as they're kneeling in front of the church there at the altar rail, and it's beautiful, and it gives you a little bit of time to reflect on what you just received before you get up and go back to your pew. Versus when you normally, like in Novus Ordo Mass, you come up in a line and you receive communion and you kind of rush and you got to keep going. So the reverence that's shown there, it's very beautiful. Sacred silence. There's moments of sacred silence in the Mass. The Gregorian chant. Instead of having contemporary like guitar music or whatever or modernist music, you have Gregorian chant, which has been around for centuries. It's like, yes, we have some good modern music, that people dance to and stuff, right? But nobody's going to say that today's pop music is compared or on the same level as, say, like Mozart, Amadeus, Beethoven, or anything like that. It's like two different worlds. And that's how Gregorian chant is. Far succeeds in beauty and dignity and reverence, today's contemporary music that's used at a lot of, English Novus Ordo masses. So you have the dignity, you have the reverence, you have the sacredness, you have sacred music or sacred language that's being used. The Latin itself is a sacred language, along with the two other languages, Hebrew and Greek, because those languages were nailed to the cross at that first Good Friday, and that makes them sacred and more efficacious, more meritorious, more effective against like demonic entities and even a devil, according to most exorcists. The fact that the language, actually, even the words of the Latin Mass, even though it's done in Latin, the Latin language is a language that's already set in stone. It's a dead language because nobody uses it anymore, but you know what you're going to get. You can't change the meaning of the words. And when you look at a missal, which is basically a translation, you have the Latin on the one side of it, on the left side, and on the right side you have the English translation, and you see the prayers that are being said. These prayers are way more profound. There's so much more content and to them. There's making them more efficacious because you get what you pray for. And unfortunately, a lot of those prayers, when they were taken from the Latin and brought into the English, they were watered down or totally removed, because the whole idea of having the Novus Ordo Mass, one of the big things was to make the Mass simplified for modern man, as if like modern man can't handle something that's more complex. I don't understand any of that. And the big other reason is because they wanted to make it Protestant friendly. Yes, you heard that. They made it Protestant friendly. So a lot of stuff that was said and stated in the Latin Mass had to be removed because it was offensive to Protestant ears, which is, I'm sorry, absolutely ridiculous, because we should not water down the truths and the treasures that we've had for centuries. In fact, the Latin Mass goes back to like at least the first 300 years of the church, the Mass would have been in Hebrew, and then after that, it became at least in the Western Church, it became Latin. So for 1,700 years, you had a Latin Mass, and the way we have it today is pretty much been unchanged for the past 500 years since the Council of Trent. And its development leading up to the Council of Trent, it started stabilizing after you had the first 500 years. It was developing like from an acorn stage to to a tree. And then the next 500 years, it became more like not much changes were made to it, but at some point after that, those 500 years, when you get to the 15th, or was it would be the 16th century, the Council of Trent, basically, kind of like made it uniformed. They kept the structure and locked it in the way it is, and that's how it was for the last 500 years or so. But anyways, beauty, reverence, respect, modesty. Yeah, that's another thing I forgot to mention. Modesty of what people wear and how they present themselves. Women wear women come dressed very modestly. Men come dressed modestly, and respectful to what, because they understand what they are entering in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. So that's my reason. Again, I attempted to do this talk under 2 minutes, but I'm already at 6 minutes right now, so that's the best I can do. Okay, quick correction I need to make to my video. I stated the first 300 years that the Mass was done in Hebrew. That's incorrect. It was actually done in Greek. The first 300 years, the Mass was done in Greek. I'm sure they had Hebrew in there, but as far as I understand, it was done in Greek. And then after those first 300 years, then the Latin started being used in the Western Church especially. So, and then pretty much from the 4th century forward, it was, the Mass was, was celebrated in Latin. So that's just one correction I wanted to make real quick to the video I just made.